Welcome to a Land Rover guide to the Land Cruiser. There's the transfer case, this is the gearbox and bell housing and the engine sump. This sump is quite nice. It drains fully down, which means the oil's going to go straight into the pan, and also it will get most of the old oil because it's at the lowest point. 300 DDI is here, so you'll always get a bit of oil just sat around at the bottom there. This is what I really like, is the slave cylinder, or rather, well, the slave cylinder's outside on the Land Rover, so you can bleed it and what have you, but the lever arm connection is on the outside here, and then you can actually, there's a hole with a grommet, you can actually look inside the bow housing if you wanted to. You could get easy access, shine a torch in, put a mirror or something like that. That's a really nice feature actually. But they've got the same kind of clutch arrangement as the Land Rover, with the lever arm pushing this way, which then pushes on the release bearing and the pressure plate. So same kind of design, and it's hydraulic as well. This is a bit easier access to the slave cylinder as a whole, but I guess this is out in the dirt, whereas in the Land Rover it's in the bell housing. So this could be more prone to dirt getting in it, but it looks like it's a better seal actually. So I don't have an experience on how reliable they are, but I tend to like that this is available for working on. It looks like it's joined in a lot easier. It looks like it's more stronger joint in here. On a Land Rover, this is a particular prone fail point. Is this, you can pull the slave cylinder out and it pulls the clip off that holds the push rod on, and then you've got to take the gearbox and the engine apart to fix that. I don't know, Land Rover's got a particular problem with the central pivot point on this arm punching through, and you lose your clutch and you've got to take it all apart. I don't know how this looks on the inside from a reliability point of view. Neither do I know how big the clutch is as well. I imagine it's quite big because the engine's quite big. Gearbox drain plug, gearbox fill plug are very similar to the R380 and the LT77, just that they're on different sides. But you've got a lot better access on the R380. On earlier 300 TDIs, it just goes straight onto the Gearbox Crossmember, which here is back from there. So you've got to kind of angle I use a milk bottle, you've got to angle the fluid forwards to then drain down. This is a lot easier. It's going to go right on the prop shaft, but you can angle it down with the drain plug here. The filler plug, there's so much room here to get access. On the 300 TDI, you've pretty much got no room. I tend to use an old ketchup bottle to squeeze it in here, but even that's a bit restricted. Here you've got loads of room. It's still a bit of a faff because you've got the footwell up here, but it's so much easier to get access all around the gearbox. Look at all the space you've got around here, and then up here as well. Loads of room, loads of space, and I guess that's good from a cooling perspective, to get a lot of potential airflow around the gearbox. The mountings here are, I guess, easily accessible. This is the Gearbox Crossmember, and on a Land Rover you've got to pretty much separate the chassis because it sits in between. You bolt it through into the sides on here. Toyota, they just bolt it underneath, so you just undo the bolts and drop it. That's a lot easier in terms of getting the gearbox and things out, and the mountings are just sat on here. So this is kind of it takes the weight, most of the weight of the transfer casing gearbox. On the Defender, the bushes are to the side, so it's pushing kind of down onto the crossmember and into the side of the chassis. Don't know if these are better, but they seem pretty solid and they're centrally located, so the distribution of weight will be balanced. As Land Rover, one's like here, one's back there, so they're kind of a bit skew. This seems like a better design. Looking at the fuel lines, a lot of the fuel lines are actually solid metal. So this is the two fuel lines here, and then they have rubber joints in between when it bypasses between lock to the body and lock to the chassis. And then they've got these really substantial clips that run the entire length and pin it to the chassis. So they're not particularly, I wouldn't say that's unprotected because you've got the radius arm and everything around here. So I wouldn't say it's unprotected. These are obviously a lot more substantial. They're less likely to leak from being chafing on anything, but these are not very likely to chafe because they've got some really good clamps around these pipes. What would be a problem though in a particularly UK environment, a Northern Europe environment, is these would corrode, whereas the plastic ones wouldn't. So there'd be a bit more of a faff in Europe. This is the transfer box lever. It's a lot more substantial. It looks like there's a lot less to go wrong when compared to the lever at the diff lock and low range lever on a Land Rover. Gets really gets really stuck and can be hard to do sometimes. It gets a lot of slack in the system, whereas this looks a lot meatier, a lot better design. Front of the transfer box, same sort of flange, big nut, but that's a staked nut rather than a nylock. This one's been mashed up quite a bit. The same's got the 4 static bolts, so these are actually made in part of the flange as opposed to being held by a big circlip. This is probably better because it's just a bit more solid. Although if any one of these breaks or the threads get screwed up, you're going to have to replace the whole flange. But you'd have to take the flange off anyway on a Land Rover to replace them, because you can only get them once you've taken the flange off. That mud shield looks really good actually. This one's a bit kinked, but that's a really good design. You'll find that on some later Land Rovers as well. This of course is completely free. Being 4-wheel drive, this connects on, this completely unlinks the front prop shaft when it's in 2-wheel drive, so this just basically sits here. So you do have complete free rotation in the front flange when it's just sat in 2-wheel drive. This is the back of the transfer box where it links into the back of the gearbox. It kind of looks like a transfer box. I think they have the same problem with the intermediate shaft ovaling the case and leaking, because this has been all covered up in silicone. Here's the fill plug. A lot easier access to the fill plug actually. The drain plug down under here. So fill plug's a little bit easier to get to on the Land Rover, on the Toyota, but the drain plug's just the same. I guess the real downside with this transfer box is that this is part of the case here, and then this is the back part of the case here. To take the transfer box off, you've got to take the case off, you've got to take all the gears out, then you've got to take the back cover off, so you can't actually take it off as a complete unit. You've got to dismantle it on the vehicle, which to me is ridiculous. It means that if you have a problem in the transfer box, you've got to pretty much cripple the vehicle and deal with it whilst the vehicle's there. You can't just take off an entire transfer box and put a good new one on and fix the other transfer box in slow time. This just means that the vehicle is just going to be off the road while you're fixing any transfer box problems. The other thing is as well, you've got dirt and all sorts of rubbish around here. It's difficult to keep it clean when you're working on gears and bearings and things up here. So I think that's better for the... So I think the Land Rover wins in that respect. They've still got a sort of a PTO cover up here and an inspection plate. The Land Rover one would be here. So very kind of similar in the jobs they do. It's taking a gear to a gear to a gear in the rear flange. Obviously it doesn't have any protection around it like the Land Rover, because there isn't a handbrake drum. They've actually gone for drum brakes on the back, and they've got a handbrake cable like a traditional car. So this is all just open access. It's the speed sensor down here, and the Land Rover would be here, so they're both quite accessible. Same as the front prop shaft. These have got cap-tib studs on the flange here, and I'm pretty confident I could get a socket in there, at least on the top ones, and rotate this a bit. So I think that would be, you won't need a special tool to get the universal joints off on here. This is the fuel tank, which is quite compact and quite well fitted in, because they have the spare wheel at the back there where a Land Rover would have its fuel tank. They've kind of compacted and fitted in it here, and it goes up and around over the prop shaft. It's quite well utilised space really, and it fits up here. It does cram up against the back of the transfer box a bit, so on a Land Rover you'd have more space here and less at the back. But what I do like is it's got a drain plug. The metal tanks of Land Rovers have got drain plugs, but the later plastic ones don't. This is a bit annoying, but this is like this is a metal tank with a covering, and it's got this cradle around it. But I'd be quite confident in dropping this fuel tank. It's quite easy. I would think there's a lot of space around here, and you've got good access to the bolts at the top here to take it off. Click here to go to the next video. Right here. That's where the button is. Right there.